Good morning and welcome to AHA Insights and Solutions, a Fairgram webinar series. We are eager to start our webinar series with an important topic, lead service line replacement. Last month, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency issued its final rule requiring water systems to inventory and replace lead service lines by 2037. I would like to introduce you to two lead service line replacement leaders, Jamie Rott with the City of Rockford, and Kyle Saunders with Fairgram. As water superintendent, Jamie leads the city's lead service line replacement program, which has replaced 3,000 lead service lines since 2017 and secured more than $19 million in principal forgiveness funding. Before Kyle joined Fairgram as Chief Strategy Officer, he was the Public Works Director at the City of Rockford, where he oversaw the start of the lead service line replacement program. It's nice to have Jamie and Kyle together again to share their insights and lessons learned with the hope of helping others, no matter where they are in the lead service line replacement process. We've muted you for this presentation, so if you have questions for Jamie and Kyle, please drop them in the chat. Jamie and Kyle, take it away.
Thank you, Anna. Before Jamie provides an overview on Rockford's approach to addressing lead over the last 8 or so years, wanted to start with highlighting some of the key changes to the lead and copper rule with the recent announcement on LCRI. The document itself is 250 pages long, very small text, so can't entirely cover that all today, but wanted to just kind of cover 6 of the key highlights in the rule. The first is, and probably one of the biggest ones for a lot of communities, is the requirement to replace all lead pipes within a 10-year period. Under LCRI, systems must create a service line replacement plan, update it regularly, and make it publicly available to consumers. We'll talk a little bit about the different means and methods to make it available a little bit later in the slide deck. It is one really important note that I want to make. In LCRI, in limited circumstances, there is a provision that allows for additional time to replace lead service lines for systems that have a high proportion of lead within their distribution system. One key thing for communities to keep in mind is US EPA estimates that those circumstances will only account for about 1% of systems. So a very few number of utilities will actually be able to qualify for that extended replacement time. One thing to understand is we're reading that executive summary under LCRI. They list that, the reason they've landed at 10 years is there are a lot of utilities across the country, cities like Detroit, Pittsburgh, Denver, Milwaukee, St. Paul, Minnesota, that have either completed their replacement efforts or are further down the road, and it is technically possible to replace all of their lead in 10 years. So just one thing to keep in mind is, for those communities that haven't read through all 250 pages, the executive summary provides some key highlights on which utilities are doing it and how they've approached it up to this point. A second key highlight under LCRI is the lowering of the lead action level from 15 parts per billion to 10 parts per billion. In addition, when that 90th percentile exceeds the action level, public notification is required. The system needs to evaluate the installation or adjustment of existing corrosion control treatment, and then they do need to conduct a robust public education program. So under LCRR, there were some certain notification requirements. Those continue and enhance under LCRI. A third big item with the rule is the requirement of locating legacy lead pipes or documenting your service materials throughout your distribution system. For states, communities in Illinois, this isn't a new requirement. Understanding that the Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act required this several years ago, but under the federal rule, there was an initial inventory submittal requirement of October 16th, 2024. The requirement does shoot for regular updates to that inventory. And then there is a final baseline inventory submittal required 3 years after the LCRI publication is made in the Federal Register. Another big provision under LCRI is the additional tap sampling requirements. There's a significant change in your lead sampling events. So utilities will be required now to collect a first and a fifth liter sample during those sampling events. And then they will be required to use the higher of the two samples when calculating that 90th percentile level. Under enhanced communication requirements, utilities are required to perform more frequent and proactive communication on the dangers of lead, as well as their community or systems plan for replacing lead. There has to be very clear health language, health impact language, as clear as there is no safe level of lead in drinking water in their CCR, as well as all of their public education materials. Some of those education materials include shutoff notices, notices tied to meter replacement activities, emergency repair, potential disturbances notices, as well as advance notice on capital projects. Again, for communities in Illinois, there are very similar requirements under the Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act. LCRI just codifies those best practices at the federal level. In addition, under the enhanced communication requirements, your consumer confidence report will need to include information on testing for lead in schools and childcare facilities within your utilities ownership, information on where consumers can find the system's lead service line replacement plan, as well as the corrosion control treatment efforts the system is undertaking. And then last, again, just trying to highlight a couple of the key takeaways. There are certain exposure reduction efforts required under LCRI. In the event that a utility has multiple action level exceedances, and the rule defines that as 3 occurrences in a rolling 5-year period, the utility will need to conduct follow-up public outreach efforts and make filters that are certified to reduce lead available to all consumers. And then additionally, anytime that a utility has a service line disturbance or a lead service line replacement activity, the utility does need to provide filters to the customer following those activities. One key thing that I want to draw attention to is the Act does provide a 3-year period before the compliance timeline starts for the replacement of lead service lines. So that 10-year window starts 3 years from when that LCRI is published in the Federal Register. And then one key thing, again, it's a 250-page document. We would highly recommend that if a utility wants to better understand how the rule is going to impact their utility, they should reference the US EPA website. There are a ton of additional resources. There's 1-page technical resources. And again, we would be happy to help if there's any questions regarding requirements under LCRI. Next slide, please.
Okay. Well, before I really get into Rockford's program, I just want to give a quick overview of the City of Rockford. So Rockford Water was founded in 1875, and next year will mark 150 years of providing water to the residents of Rockford. Our system is comprised of 25 production wells and 24 facilities. We have approximately 815 miles of water main and 52,000 active water service connections. We generate about $38 million in revenue each year. And over the next 5 years, we are planning to spend approximately $95 million in our capital program. And that program includes, production facility improvements, water main replacement, and lead service lines. And speaking of lead, as of right now, we suspect we have 30,000 lead service lines. However, we are working on fine-tuning that number, and we're hopeful that that number will not increase. We'd rather see it decrease than increase at this point. But based on that suspected number, Rockford's replacement rate in 2027 will need to be 3,000 services per year. So that'll be quite an extensive project, and the cost to replace those services will be approximately $400 million. And that $400 million is only a straight construction cost. That does not include any communications, project management, bidding costs, and so forth. So next slide, if you don't mind.
So Rockford started replacing lead in 2017, and we started it as a no interest loan offered to customers that they could pay back on their water bill. However, we saw very little participation in that. I think about 30 to 40% of people were signing up. And then in 2019, we secured our first SRF loan from the state and decided that in order to really get the lead out and entice people to sign up, we would make the replacement at no cost to the customer. And it has been free for our customer since then. As time has evolved as well, we have really replaced services in 3 different ways. So we look at replacement in 3 different approaches. We have our SRF loan program. So that's a very specific target area. It is in an area that the loan covers, and we have to work in that area. You cannot expand outside of that area. So we call that our SRF loan program project. Then we also have our water main replacement. So anytime you're replacing water main, you're not able to do a partial lead service line replacement. So when you're replacing water main, you have to replace that service entirely. So that's the second way we replace lead services. And then thirdly, we have our on-call contract or emergency maintenance contract. So our on-call program, we have 2 contractors that assist us with that. And that's when anytime we have a leak or a break or required maintenance and we disturb the line, that service now is required to be replaced. And this program takes care of that. And we spend approximately $1 million to $2 million per year on that on-call contract. So throughout our program, we've focused on high-risk lead service lines. Those are the areas that we have been identifying first. So areas that have partial lead service lines that maybe a water main replacement project had impacted in the past, or anywhere we have high concentrations of lead that a contractor could move down. And then, of course, areas that are at high risk or disadvantaged. And today, since 2017, we have replaced 3,000 lead service lines. Oh, next slide. So in addition to our program approach, we have looked outside the box for replacement. So usually a lot of service lines in the past were replaced by open cutting. However, we just realized we're spending a lot of money on that. We need to look at other technologies. So we looked at directional drilling and pipe pulling. And this video shows that pipe pulling technology in action. In our own staff, we purchased a pipe puller at the City of Rockford, and our own staff complete this work. So if all goes well, pipe pulling replacement only takes about 1 to 2 minutes. So it's a technology and a replacement method that is nice to have in your toolbox, because you are going to utilize all of these construction methods, whether it's open cutting, directional drilling, or pipe pulling. Oh, the next slide.
Just wanted to highlight the ways that Fehr has helped the City of Rockford, manage their lead service replacement efforts. Really twofold up to this point. One is, funding support, and the other is overall program management. From a funding support standpoint, we supported the city in their early project plan submittal. So just trying to kind of understand, back in 2017, the most cost-effective way for the city to, finance lead service line replacement, taking advantage of the principal forgiveness dollars that existed, well before, there was a really, really high application rate. So we supported the submittal of that initial project plan and then the revisions since. As Jamie mentioned, we're now advancing into phase 7 of their lead service line replacement efforts. So there's been, constant revisions to that project plan throughout. In addition, from a funding support standpoint, we've partnered with the city on their loan administration. So everything from submitting the loan documents to, helping the city prepare for their public hearings, to passing their debt authorizing ordinances, all the way through, funding, disbursements, and then overall project closeout, as well as the EPA auditing process. So just, came alongside the city and helped in those different ways on the funding support side. From an overall program management side, Obviously preparation of construction documents, supporting this, the city's efforts in securing temporary construction easements. So physically going door to door in neighborhoods, coordinating the scheduling activities. So, not only scheduling with the contractors, the excavator, but also scheduling the plumber, as well as the homeowner. And oftentimes that can be some of the most complex scheduling, just to try to get three schedules to overlap. And then both pre-inspection and post-inspection services, as well as, project closeout. So punch list items, change order management, anything that went above and beyond the overall, the initial scope. Fairgram has supported the city in those efforts. Next slide. So funding, right? I think that's one of the biggest hurdles and one of the scariest things for a lot of communities. We're going to highlight federal and state funding today, but I wanted to start with just kind of highlighting the different local funding sources that utilities and communities across Illinois, Wisconsin, and Iowa are using. Certainly enterprise funds, so funds derived from the water utilities is one that's most commonly used, and whether that's direct payment for lead service line replacement or debt service, whatever the case may be, using those enterprise funds to fund replacement efforts. The second being, there are opportunities where the general fund in respective communities are helping support lead-related activities. And then lastly, there are some communities that have elected to use, local infrastructure tax, so proceeds from that tax to help support lead service line replacement. On the state and federal funding side, one key takeaway is the federal government, through capital grants supported by the bipartisan infrastructure law, is funding SRFs throughout the country. It's estimated that US EPA made the announcement on October 8th that there's $26 billion set aside through bill through the state SRFs to support lead service line replacement. Kind of want to highlight each of the different states that we've worked in regarding lead. The state of Illinois is definitely one that I referenced the Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act. It's a state that started addressing lead much sooner than most states. So in Illinois, the EPA manages the drinking water SRF program. In fiscal year 25, there's approximately $250 million set aside for lead-related activities. In all three states, Illinois, Iowa, and Wisconsin, planning, design, and construction activities are all eligible expenses. So that's a key distinction I want to draw. In Illinois, funds cannot be spent on unknown materials. So really key on getting those inventories well documented, completed, and renewed so that you can make sure that your activities are eligible for SRF dollars. In Illinois, 51% of the $250 million is set aside for principal forgiveness, really focused on getting money to disadvantaged communities. And then the remaining 49% comes to communities by way of loan. Those loans are 0% interest. In Illinois, there are 20-year base terms. Anyone can qualify for a 30-year term, and then disadvantaged communities can qualify for a 40-year repayment term. So again, on the loan dollars, 0% interest up to 40 years to repay that. In Illinois, there's a $3 million max in principal forgiveness. There is a $13 million max award. And in Illinois, you are able to submit multiple applications, in one funding period. So looking at additional phases, additional projects, trying to maximize your overall award. In Illinois, there's an annual call for projects. And then one really key thing here is that funding nomination form to get in line for intended use plan consideration in Illinois is due on March 31st. As I mentioned, Illinois is much further along than most states. That intended funding list in Illinois is multiple pages long, and for several years now has been heavily subscribed. In Wisconsin, the DNR is the agency that manages the state revolving loan fund. From a funding standpoint, it's about 2/3 the size of Illinois, or about $160 million. In Wisconsin, there's three buckets that those funds kind of flow through. There's the drinking water SRF bucket, the Public Service Commission bucket, and then the private lead service line program bucket. And one thing that's really important is funding can flow through for one community, can flow through all of those buckets, one of those buckets, two of those buckets. It just really depends on whether or not servicing that debt will require a rate increase. If a rate increase is required, the portion of that funding will flow through the Public Service Commission for consideration. If it's just going to be private lead service lines that need to be replaced, it will flow through the private lead service line program. And then, if the existing rates can already service the debt, it would flow through that existing drinking water SRF program. But one key thing is it really requires in Wisconsin a good grasp and a good handle on your inventory. You really need to know where your lead service lines are, and then obviously look at your rates to see what impacts that may have on them. Again, Wisconsin planning, design, and construction are all eligible activities. 49% of the funding is set aside from principal forgiveness, 51% for loan. In both Wisconsin and Iowa, there are 0% interest, 20-year base repayment terms, and up to 30-year repayment terms for disadvantaged communities. And then there is an annual call for projects in Wisconsin, and that intent to apply is due by October 31st every year. And then lastly, in Iowa, it is a program that's a little, it is smaller in overall funding. It's about 1/3 the size of Illinois, or about $80 million. DNR does manage those funds. Planning, design, and construction are all eligible activities. However, there are separate loans for each of those. Again, 49% principal forgiveness, 51% loan. There is a quarterly call for projects, so that's a little unique in Iowa. And then if you look at the most recently published quarterly intended use plan, there are about 8 projects listed on it. So one thing I just wanted to draw attention to in both, Wisconsin and Iowa, in past funding cycles, there has been a concern that those states could risk losing funding just given the low level of applications they've been seeing. So if there are communities that have led and want to go after funding, it's important that you get through the application process and get on that list so that you can secure that funding. Next slide, please. And then just hit on this very quickly. There are other funding opportunities like CDBG, WIFIA, WIN, and congressionally directed spending. Those programs have a lot of nuances. There's a lot of considerations and eligibility requirements that communities need to be aware of. WIFIA is a program that's really geared towards very large projects that have a very complicated application process that can be very costly. CDBG funds, you have to really understand your entitlement status. Congressionally directed spending, you really need to understand overall community support and prioritization. So don't want to hit on these too much, but certainly there are other funding opportunities that exist. And one thing I just wanted to hit before we finished with funding was in LCRI, there is some language that states that failure to comply, with the requirements on that 10-year replacement could jeopardize federal funding that a community receives. So, it is important that communities start. There is a time period of compliance, so start small and start building up to it. But just wanted to draw some attention to that note in LCRI. Next slide.
Okay, so reflecting over the last 8 years and really looking into the future, a few key points to remember when replacing lead is community engagement. I cannot stress this enough. Meet people where they are at. So if you're replacing lead services in a specific area, have a project meeting in that area and invite all those that are impacted. I mean, we've even had meetings where we set up on a vacant lot and had just a community meeting right there in their neighborhood after work. And it was quite successful. Give updates at your council or board meetings. Use social media and your city websites. Help spread your message. really, in order to get this program through, get all your lead service lines replaced, you really need to get your message out and talk to people about the program and make them feel comfortable about a full service line replacement into their home. Another, be open-minded and proactive. We're learning as we go. After each project, look at what went right, look at what could be improved. That may mean modifying your bid documents, could be taking pre and post inspections before every service, replacement, having more meetings in person or virtually. And it could also mean looking at changes in construction methods or materials. I know one of the big things that we changed or really continue to modify throughout our process is when we bid our lead service lines, we have a base bid just for one address. What is it going to take to replace the service line? And then we have several contingency items. Are you going to run into a retaining wall? Are you going to run into a cinder block wall? Are you going to replace the meter while you're there? So really fine tuning those bid documents is key. Also reach out to other communities, see what they're doing, look at their forms. Always having simplified forms for your customers to review is best. Customers want that information right up front. They don't want to have to read several paragraphs to understand what's going on. So really simplified information, information that's easy for any customer to understand. Another key point is your inventory. Having an accurate inventory is key to developing your target areas, especially when seeking funding. In Illinois, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, you have to have a very specific area. You cannot work outside of that area. So it's key to know your inventory in that area. How many lead service lines? Will the contractor be able to work on one block for a week at a time? Is there enough services? They're not jumping around. That helps save on construction costs. And lastly, keep in mind that you may have to have multiple programs to address lead. You may utilize multiple contractors and in-house staff or have a combination. Don't be afraid to really think outside of the box or your comfort zone. Lead service lines is going to be a huge hurdle for every municipality. So really having a lot of tools in your toolbox to address lead is key. Next slide.
All right. Thank you, Jamie and Kyle. We have about a couple minutes left. How about we go to questions? Emily?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions in the chat. The first one I think is from Kyle's first slide. Are filters required to be delivered now or in 2027?
So great question. So a little bit of a complicated answer, and I'll try to make it as simple as possible. So there are several filter requirements listed under a lot of different legislation, right? So if the community is in Illinois, there is that, I kept referencing the Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act that passed in 2019, 2020 time period. Under that act, communities in Illinois are required to provide filters both after a service line replacement or following a service line disturbance. So that is already in effect in Illinois. At the federal level under LCRR, which was published in 2021, there are requirements to provide filters under both replacement and disturbance activities. So those are already in effect. And then that third kind of level of filters where, if during a sampling event, you were to exceed an action level and there's a requirement to provide filters, that would go into effect. And again, I would always recommend working with either IEPA or, whatever the agency is in your respective state to confirm for this sampling event which rules you're working under. Because if there were sampling events that were already underway before LCRI was published, they're following the LCRR requirements. For new sampling events that happen afterwards, it's my understanding that IEPA will be following the rules under LCRI. So long answer to a short question. I think it depends, and happy to follow up with any specific questions. But, if in doubt, call IEPA and just get clarity on what the expectation is.
All right, thank you. The next question is, how does the cost of pipe pulling compare to directional drilling? What pipe material is being used for pipe pulling?
Jamie, I'll
Sorry about that.
probably.
Yep, I
Yeah.
was just unmuting, sorry. So for pipe pulling, we utilize that technology in-house. So it is a lot of our in-house staff doing that. So it's our staff time. And we utilize a mixture of materials. We do HDP as well as copper. Now, pipe pulling does have a few limitations as at all construction methods. If you have made a repair on that line in the past, a lot of times that pipe puller could get caught in that area. So really understanding your service line will help you with that pipe pulling. So if it's a service that you've never had complications on, it's pretty straightforward. That pipe puller is a great technology to utilize. We do, like I said, we do have several contracts in place. So we pipe pull, and then we also directional drill. But pipe pulling is done entirely with our staff instead of hiring a company to directional drill. So for us, we see a cost savings just anywhere from about $3,000 in reduction on that, $3,000 to $5,000 in reduction on that service line cost.
All right. Well, we went over about a minute. Such a good topic. I hope everyone understands us going over a little bit. But we will follow up with any questions that you might have that were in the chat or in the Q&A that we didn't get to. Or if you have additional questions for Jamie or Kyle, please feel free to email them. Their email addresses are on the screen. And on behalf of Jamie and Kyle and Fairgram, I'd like to thank you for attending our webinar. We're planning our 2025 schedule. We hope to see you again at a future webinar.